Hey, Dog Nation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Georgia United Credit Union. I think we're going to have a really fun show today because I thought that Kirby Smart yesterday said some very interesting things, and it's a really, I think, compelling follow-up to the debate that's been going on after the Notre Dame game on Saturday. You know, anytime a team like Georgia gets a high-profile top 10 win, there's just going to be a lot to unpack from that game, and this week, I think, for a lot of UGA fans, is an example of that. Well, apparently there's some unpacking going on in Athens as well when it comes to a Kirby Smart. Pretty candid here. And as I'm going to show you off the top of the show, the degree to which Kirby Smart is open about his thought process actually makes him somewhat unique in comparison to a couple of other college football coaches who've been a little blowhardy when questioned by the media about some of their own decision-making. I think if you're a UGA fan, you like Kirby Smart's version of this better, and I'll tell you more about that throughout our program. Also, Kirby did respond back to the whole Notre Dame fake injury thing. I thought that was kind of funny, too. Interesting, at least. We'll talk about that. And apparently, Georgia fans have something very big in mind for Neyland Stadium next Saturday. We'll address that as well. It's a busy show. We're glad you're with us. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Georgia United Credit Union, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Georgia United Credit Union. Show your team pride with the Georgia Bulldogs debit card. Check out gucu.org/GoDogs for more details.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There is something that's been going on in college football a little bit this year that I find to be kind of annoying. And I think you may see the exact opposite of that seemingly happening at UGA. And I think if you're a Dog fan, this ought to be pretty good news. So let me kind of begin this way. There are a couple of coaches lately who, when questioned about some of their decision-making, have kind of been pretty arrogant in the face of one of the most gigantic blunders that could ever be made. You don't care about this game, but I'm going to set this up as a way of talking about Georgia, and I think you will like the point that I eventually arrive on, so kind of stay with me for a couple of minutes if you don't mind. The other day, Pitt is playing Penn State, and late in the game, Pitt, down a touchdown, decides to kick a field goal. Now, anyone who's ever played Madden knows what a bad idea that is, because obviously if you're down 7, you kick a field goal. Even if you make the field goal to go down 4, you still need a touchdown. And it's not going to be any easier to get a touchdown any other point in the game than it is right there when you're down. I'm talking about like deep in the red zone in your opponent's territory. However, Pitt coach Pat Narduzzi, when questioned about this, absolutely gave the stiff arm and said, "Who are any of you to question me about this?" Listen to Narduzzi as a way of, I think, providing an interesting contrast to something you're about to hear from Kirby Smart. Here is the Pitt coach.
Why go for the field goal? Why not go for the touchdown?
Because you need 2 scores to win the football game. Unless you guys are playing for overtime, we're trying to win a football game. So,
Well, you could have gone for 2 also, and then it's a 1-possession game.
Like I said, we can look back at all the calls, guys. All the armchair quarterbacks, you guys all got those armchair desks, so it's easy to make those decisions.
I mean, this sounds like a coach from like some movie from the 70s, the 80s. All you armchair quarterbacks, I don't care what you think. I'm the guy with the play card in my hand. I'm the head coach, and how dare you question me on anything, even if it's the kind of blunder that a teenager would know the difference in playing some video game. How dare any of you question me? Yes, I kicked a field goal down a touchdown and seemingly wasn't aware that I could have also won the game with a 2-point conversion if I was trying to make this, as simple and easy on me as I could. But no one will dare criticize me. No one will dare question my decision-making. Now, another coach recently was even more intense in his response to the media than that. This is Pat Fitzgerald, the Northwestern coach. Now, the backstory on the Narduzzi thing I knew about because I kind of watched this game. The truth is, I'm not even sure what they're even questioning Pat Fitzgerald about because it's Northwestern football. I don't really care. But once again, listen to Fitzgerald, the Northwestern coach's response when questioned about the media about his play calling, and one of the buzzy catchphrases of the season, it belongs to the Northwestern coach after this.
Does that mean that you're satisfied with the offensive game plan the way it is, and you guys just need to execute that game plan better?
Well, we just take 90 hours and play Wii and golf all week. What do you think? Yeah, I go in every game plan expecting it to work, to be quite honest with you. I understand there's 40,000 experts on Twitter that can call plays for me, so my email address is hashtag I don't care, okay? So shoot that out.
Shoot that out there, he says. Hashtag I don't care. That's my email address. I don't think that's how the computers work, but nonetheless, that's Fitzgerald's line on that. Now, hear me when I tell you this. Pat Narduzzi and Pat Fitzgerald are 9-to-5 ham and eggers if there ever were. These are two of the least accomplished coaches you can find in all of college football, and yet when questioned about some of their decision-making, at least in Narduzzi's case, a pretty egregious blunder. The Fitzgerald thing, you can Google that for yourself to find out what they're even upset with him about. But their response is hashtag I don't care, armchair quarterbacks, blah, 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 essentially reaching down deep into the coach's playbook to kind of fire back at any criticism that might come their way. Now, let's talk about Athens, Georgia here for a moment, because if ever there was a coach who's earned the right to say hashtag I don't care, it'd be Georgia coach Kirby Smart, because compared to the two Pats here, Narduzzi and Fitzgerald, and by the way, both those lines have come within the last couple of weeks, but compared to those two guys and compared to most of the 130 coaches in college football, Kirby Smart's achievements in going on 4 years on the job are magnitudes higher. He's been to the college football playoff. He's won an SEC championship. He's won scores and scores of big games. He actually won a game on Saturday against the number 7 team in the country, Notre Dame. After the loss, Notre Dame stays in the top 10. So if there was ever a coach who could say about questions of why did you not go for a touchdown late in the game and kick a field goal instead, if there was ever a coach who's earned the right to say hashtag I don't care, hashtag armchair quarterbacks, whatever else, it would be Kirby Smart. But Smart did the exact opposite of that when he spoke to reporters yesterday. And by the way, you can see the full video of this at the DawgNation YouTube page. If you haven't subscribed to DawgNation on YouTube yet, I would encourage you to do that. Smart, instead, far more candid. The question comes up of, hey, you face some criticism for not going for a touchdown late in the game. You kicked the field goal instead. What's it like to be the guy making that decision? What's it like to have a bunch of armchair quarterbacks, armchair coaches looking over your shoulder and saying what they would have done in that place? And Kirby Smart, to his credit, gave, I thought, a pretty interesting answer. What makes Smart different than some other coaches in this respect, I think Georgia fans will like. Here is Kirby Smart going deep on what has been a bit of a hot topic this week. Here's the UGA coach.
Oh, we quality control everything. I mean, we go through – that call's unique because we had eternity. I mean, we had a review. So it wasn't like most of those calls are split second where you've already made the decision. I mean, we talked for probably 30 minutes before the game on what we would do on 4th and 1 or 3rd and 1 on the goal line. What are our top plays? And then we talked for another 30 minutes of what are our top plays on 4th and 1, 4th and 2 out in the field. And we go through that. What is their short yardage defense? What do they do? All that's been talked about so that when that time comes, the decision's already made and I already know what I'm going to do. Now, the only thing that affects that is the ebb and flow of the game. How are you playing defensively? How are you playing offensively? Is it a high-scoring game? Is it a low-scoring game? How many opportunities are they going to get to score? So that's the only thing that would affect that decision other than what you've decided before the game. So we spend a lot of time on that. I meet with the offense about short yards and goal line every week to figure out what we think's good, what we don't think's good, how we feel about our short yardage plan. And guess what you say most of the time? I feel really good about it, right? Because you're optimistic. But you get in the game and you get the ebb and flow and you decide how you think you're going to play those situations. And we did that. We talked about it on the headphones.
Before we get into the substance of what Smart has to say there, let me talk two things about the tone with which Smart addresses that question. There are two things in play there that I think are really important. First of all, Smart seemingly acknowledges that when you're the head coach of Georgia, people are going to question the decisions that you make. You're playing in high-profile games. You have a high-profile job. And Smart, by the way he answers that question, shows the skin that's thick enough to deal with the pressure cooker that is being the head coach at UGA, where even after a game like Notre Dame, the question's not, did you win? It's how did you win and how impressive were you doing that? Smart shows with his demeanor there that he is totally ready for that kind of pressure cooker and has been essentially since he took the job back in 2016. The other thing that Smart shows there is a self-confidence to say that even though at least, several 100,000, if not 1 million people are going to question my decision, ultimately this is my decision to make. I'm going to tell you about the thought process that I go through on this, but ultimately it's going to be my decision. So you see some thick skin from Smart there, and you see a resolve about his own position of being the guy in charge, as the old saying has gone for a decade. The buck stops with Kirby Smart, and his demeanor there kind of reflects that. And then you get into the actual substance of that. Do I think Kirby should have gone for the touchdown late in the game? Yeah, I probably do. The fact that Kirby's willing to talk about that right there, though, and kind of go into the process he goes through making that decision, I actually think that's a pretty good thing. And that's going to be a little bit of a theme for our show today. We're going to hear more from Kirby Smart coming up in a moment. But my overall takeaway from having heard what I heard yesterday is that when it comes to the answers facing Georgia, maybe sometimes Kirby Smart's belief on that's not always going to be exactly the same as all of ours might be, or maybe mine in particular might be, or maybe yours in particular might be. But even if the answers differ, it certainly seems like Kirby Smart is asking himself all the right questions, and that is a very good thing. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Georgia United Credit Union. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us, no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just really happy to have you with us, and happy to have Georgia United Credit Union with us as well, because they've got a really cool thing that I want to make sure that you're aware of. This is, for the Georgia fan who likes to have everything, this is sort of the next big thing to have. How about a Georgia Bulldogs debit card from Georgia United Credit Union? There are 3 different design options to choose from, and it can be yours when you open a free Georgia United checking account with options to earn interest there as well. Of course, there are 19 branch locations located throughout the metro Atlanta area, and up to 100,000 surcharge-free ATMs as well. So Georgia United Credit Union, incredibly convenient to access and do business with, and that's one of the reasons why we like Georgia United Credit Union so much. Also, if you want to learn more about the Georgia Bulldogs debit card from Georgia United Credit Union, a great website to go to is gucu.org/GoDogs. That's gucu.org/GoDogs. You can find out more about the Georgia Bulldogs debit card and find out more about what makes Georgia United Credit Union unique and better, and a great company to do some business with. It's so much more than a bank. It's going to help you get all your finances in order and take really good care of you. So check out Georgia United Credit Union. It's great to have them today as a part of DawgNation Daily. We'll get our buddy Mike Griffith here coming up in just a minute. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. Today, brought to you by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And here with our doghouse, I want to hear more from Kirby Smart just for a moment. As I said before, going deep, being a little bit introspective on some of the issues that seemed to come out of the game against Notre Dame on Saturday, a win to be celebrated, some questions to be asked, some topics to be debated coming off of that. And I thought one of the things in particular that Kirby Smart addressed yesterday that sounds very, very similar to something I've heard from a lot of UGA fans going back to Saturday night is that Georgia's obviously got a game plan. We know what the nucleus of this offense is. We know it wants to run the football. We know it's built itself around a big offensive line. Opposing defenses know that as well. What happens then? What's the counterpunch to a defense that tries to stop the thing that is your bread and butter, the thing that you do so well? You're going to like this from Kirby Smart. Here's the coach again.
What can we do to get the ball to our playmakers in space? How can we do it better? How can we find plays to get guys on the perimeter and loosen some teams up, throw the ball downfield, find ways to get George the ball? I mean, it's limitless that what we're trying to do. But those are the central focus is protect Jake, let him throw the ball vertical, and let us spread the ball out some and loosen people up. We know our strength is running the ball, but sometimes teams do everything they can to take that away, and you got to have answers.
No, admittedly, there's an aspect of that that's easier said than done, getting vertical, getting horizontal, spreading teams out so they don't just, stack the box and stop the run. But once again, the fact that Georgia's acknowledging that coming off of Saturday, maybe not as much of that as there could have been. I think if you're a Dog fan, I think you take that as a pretty good thing, and I think it becomes a pretty good measuring stick for how you measure this program going through the rest of the season. Do they evolve offensively when the running game is, at least in the early portion of the game, being stymied? Do they have an evolution that allows all of a sudden Jake Fromm to have a little bit more freedom to do some of the things that he truly does best? And how about some of the things that Notre Dame was doing defensively against Georgia this past Saturday? In some cases, playing some games, the defensive line there along the line of scrimmage, kind of slanting in some of the gaps and trying to, use speed to kind of counterbalance the overwhelming size the Georgia offensive line brought to the table. Once again, Kirby Smart pretty candid in talking about how teams like Notre Dame choose to defend the Georgia running game and ultimately the price they could pay for playing the way they choose to play. Here's more from Kirby Smart.
that affects them. I mean, because when you move, you get washed. So, I mean, slant and angling is like rolling the dice a little bit. It's just, I've seen a lot of slant and angle teams that got mashed, by us. It usually works early and it usually wears out later. And that's kind of what took effect. I mean, we were much more capable of running the ball as the game transpired than as the game started. And I think if you look over the history of our program, that's been the case. We're more efficient running the ball later in the game.
Which kind of goes back to that keep chopping mentality that Smart's talked about for a while. And, certainly it seemed like Georgia was asserting itself with the running game a little bit more late in the game. However, I think Georgia fans also like the idea of what Smart said with his earlier statement, which is that, hey, in addition to that keep chopping mentality where the running game wears you down over the course of a game, also be aggressive and make teams pay for selling out to stop that run. Either way, to hear Smart be as candid as he was yesterday, I thought was a pretty interesting thing. It's Around the Doghouse. It's presented by our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And by now, you've been hearing me talk about ESOG for a long time. A solutions-based company. That means that when there's a simple, easy fix to the waterproofing issue or foundation issue that you're facing, Engineered Solutions of Georgia will give you that simple fix for that. But let's face it, some things, especially when it comes to the foundation of your home, they can be a little bit more complicated to fix. And if that be the case, you want to trust my friends at ESOG because they have 2 full-time engineers on staff. And they also have something else really cool I want you to know about. A fully transferable triple protection warranty, which is on materials, installation, design. That is a great, great deal. So the best way for you to get in touch with my friends at ESOG, if you're having any kind of waterproofing issue, you got water coming in your basement, or even like a damp space in your crawl spot, a damp spot in your crawl space, those can be signs of a bigger problem. That's why you want to at least get a consultation from ESOG. So get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now, and you can get in touch with Engineered Solutions of Georgia. All right, it's great to have you this here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. We'll hear more from Kirby Smart a little later on in our program. Some very candid words from him assessing what went right and maybe what still needs improvement coming off the game against the Fighting Irish this past Saturday. But for now, on more of that, more of what's happening during the bye week in Athens, let's talk to Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Mike Griffith there yesterday as Kirby Smart met with reporters. Got a chance to see a little bit of practice, too, as some Georgia players try to get their way back on the mend and get ready for Tennessee coming up in 2 weeks' time. Before that, still a lot to kind of dive into looking back at the game against the Fighting Irish. And I guess, Mike, let me just kind of start open-ended here, and then we'll just kind of see where it goes from there. What's your overall takeaway from having seen Georgia versus Notre Dame on Saturday?
Well, I think that I saw a lot of good and I saw a lot of bad. I mean, I saw a lot of guys respond, and I saw some other personnel that didn't respond. Kind of a mixed bag, BA. I'll be honest. I thought Georgia was further along, but at the same time, Notre Dame was better than I expected. And Notre Dame played with passion and fire, and I've got to give Notre Dame credit. I mean, I didn't think there was any way that game could live up to the 2017 game, and I suppose it's up for debate whether or not it did, but I thought it was just an incredible game, an incredible environment. I'll tell you, it's one of the most memorable football games I've ever been around, certainly one that I've ever seen in person, so I'm more impressed with Kirby Smart after yesterday, though, and I think you hit the nail on the head, as you always do on DawgNation Daily. I thought Kirby's transparency, to me, is extremely encouraging, and I'm really impressed by the tact he's taken. I mean, he's saying the same things the fans are, basically.
Well, and it doesn't necessarily mean that every fan's going to agree with every aspect of everything that he said yesterday, but the fact that he's as open as he was about his thought process, the fact that he, to me, kind of left the door open for high-profile coach, big-time game, there are going to be, decisions questioned. The fact that Smart doesn't run from that, I at least think that's a really good thing. Now, there is an aspect of some of what he said that's easier said than done when he says, hey, we want to stretch the field more vertically. We want to get, spread teams out and, he didn't say this, I'm going to paraphrase, punish teams for wanting to stack the box and stop the run. certainly it's easier to say you want to do that than it is to go out there and actually execute that. But the fact that that Smart even addressed those topics, so similar to what people have been saying in our comment section the last couple of days, I will say, speaking here strictly as a fan for a moment, I took that as a really good sign.
Absolutely. And the biggest revelation to me, and the most encouraging thing if you're a Georgia fan, because let's face it, that offense looked shaky in the first half. It did. It looked shaky. And Kirby explained it. He said, hey, here's what happened, guys. I mean, paraphrasing. We weren't getting the plays in time for Jake to make the play call at the line of scrimmage. And Eric Zier said it, and I got a story up on DawgNation right now, but Eric Zier, he might as well be a fortune teller. He's pretty much told us exactly what's going to happen for the first 4 games back in July. But he said the biggest weapon is Jake Fromm and his ability to make plays at the line of scrimmage. And Kirby revealed that the play calls were getting in late. And so Jake wasn't able to make those adjustments at the line of scrimmage. And BA, that changes everything for me. Because I'm thinking, what I'm seeing here doesn't match what I saw before. And why? And it's because Jake didn't have the time to get them into the right play call. And so what you saw would have been akin to a young quarterback who couldn't make changes. Instead of seeing the savvy third-year veteran in Jake Fromm, who always seems to find the right play for the right occasion. And so that explained a lot to me. And I really appreciated that Kirby was transparent about it today, guys. It's something we got to do better. And if I was a Georgia fan, boy, I whatever concerns you would have, I would exhale right now and say that explains a lot.
Well, be that as it may, one of the other things I thought that Smart said was interesting yesterday, and he kind of did this in an unsolicited manner, which makes it even more interesting, is he did mention George Pickens by name. And, Pickens does get targeted a couple times, and, certainly plenty of fans are going to say that, he may have been pass interfered on at least one of those that obviously would change the tone of how Pickens' involvement ultimately looked. But one way or another, Pickens doesn't record a catch and wasn't targeted a ton. The fact that Kirby also mentioned Pickens by name yesterday in kind of an unsolicited fashion, saying we need to get, George the ball more, or at least try to get him the ball more, I kind of found that to be somewhat interesting too, because that also is reflective a little bit of a fan opinion. It would be very easy for Kirby Smart, and you can cite plenty of examples in the past where this kind of has happened. It'd be very easy for Smart to kind of, downplay a freshman in particular and say, hey, listen, we got a lot of guys, and, it's different guys, whatever the defense dictates, blah, blah, blah. Smart's certainly done some of that kind of stuff in the past. But the fact that he did mention Pickens by name yesterday when he didn't necessarily have to, that also kind of caused me to raise a bit of an eyebrow.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think George Pickens has more upside from a talent standpoint than any receiver in the SEC. And I know those guys at Alabama run really fast and run away from people, but George Pickens is doing some amazing things. We've seen it with our eyes. You trust your eyes. The head coach knows it. And here's the thing. In the game, in the flow of the game, it's the same thing with like the Zamir White comment when he said, you need to get Zamir. In the flow of the game, sometimes you don't think to get this guy in there because it was a type of game where every snap counted. There wasn't the thought of how many times have we thrown at George Pickens so far? How many times have we given it to James Cook in the open field? As Zamir White gotten in the game, it was kind of a breathless game, really, where Georgia really didn't have much time to breathe. So I think this is all hindsight, and as Kirby says, quality control when they go back and look at things. But, yeah, there shouldn't be another game where George Pickens isn't targeted, more than twice. I mean, I got to believe he should be targeted 3 or 4 times every game minimum, and you got to think James Cook's going to touch the ball more than once in a contest.
So you mentioned Pickens in comparison to the Alabama receivers. Here's the one thing I will say about that. The one thing that even in a small sample size, and I think it's very important to be very clear about this, Pickens' college career is an extraordinarily small sample size for the moment. But in the small sample size, the one thing we've seen from him is he's got ball skills. He uses his body really well. But in comparison to some of the top Alabama receivers, the one thing they do bring to the table is speed. And if you're watching these Alabama highlights on Saturday night or just watching the game when it's really happening, you see on those slant patterns and things like that, those Alabama receivers run away from defensive backs. I think the more that Pickens plays here his freshman season, I think one of the important questions that's going to be asked and answered in terms of does Pickens live up to what some of the other freshman receivers around college football have done the last couple of years is how he accounts for that. Because if you want to go back to the recruiting trail, measurably, Pickens' 40 time wasn't going to be as high as some of the other guys around college football. I think it should be well documented what kind of prospect I think Pickens is going to be. but in a game, what does that end up looking like? How does he account for what certain guys in the SEC has, which is probably a little bit more of kind of a track star type speed? I do think that's going to be an interesting thing to observe from Pickens going through the rest of the season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You got to have that speed component. And all of these guys grow. I mean, Kenny McIntosh was supposed to slow too, and yet if he,
hold on, Mike. I didn't say slow. I said less fast and the fastest receiver in the SEC. But by all means, please continue.
Right. Well, Kenny McIntosh wasn't supposed to be as fast as others either, and yet, the metrics at Georgia have shown something else since he's been on campus. So guys grow. But BA, what I like about Pickens isn't necessarily the track star speed. It's the body control in the hands. And to me, he's making catches that I see guys on Sunday making. And, Georgia showed how you could set down those Alabama receivers for a few quarters, and that was at the college level. So we could go back and forth, but those guys are absolutely proven. I'm not trying to take anything away from Alabama's receivers or deny their skills and talents. I just know that what I see in George Pickens defies my eyes as far as what I've ever seen from a freshman receiver. And obviously the head coach feels the same way. I think Dominic Blaylock is another guy that should get more touches. I was disappointed that he was only targeted twice, and I was disappointed that he wasn't used in the punt return right off the bat. But these are things that Kirby Smart's going to address during the bye week. I think there's a ton of positives moving forward to come out of this game, even though that may not have been Georgia's best game. The fact that the head coach is checking off all these boxes and telling us exactly what needs to be fixed, and it's in line with, I think, what most of us saw, to me is really encouraging. Because some coaches get in denial. You wonder, are they going to be stubborn, or are they afraid to change? And Kirby Smart's a guy that says, if it ain't broke, make it better. And I just love that slogan.
So you mentioned Zamir White. That does come up yesterday as well. And, Smart's answer kind of dovetails to some of the things we've been talking about on our program for the last couple of days. I thought John Stinchcomb, the former UGA All-American, said this in a really interesting way right now. And this is not what I would have thought the season was going to be playing out like for Georgia. I made the case prior to the start of the season that I thought that Georgia might be more of an ensemble of running backs this year than it had been before, where an even distribution of carries, maybe among three guys, would take place. But on Saturday, as John Stinchcomb said, DeAndre Swift was the guy, and right now Kirby seemingly has a great deal of trust in Swift, seemingly for good reason. And at the moment, the additional carries for Swift are kind of coming at the expense of Zamir White. And obviously, I'm like a lot of other fans who you'd like to see White on the field more and see him get his chance. And I'm sure before the year's done, we'll get a chance to do that. But certainly Smart's reasoning of this right now can't really be debated too much. That DeAndre Swift gave Georgia a little bit of a hero performance, even though the overall numbers didn't look that great in terms of the final rushing yards. The individual rushes themselves were pretty big time. And if that's the reason why White's not playing more, then I don't think that Georgia fans have too much room to squabble with that.
Yeah, I think Connor Riley's done a couple of really good stories on this. I think right after the game, Connor had a story on DeAndre, and then this morning in his What We Learned piece, I thought Connor really, kind of canvassed that pretty well. And I would agree with that. Here's the thing, though. DeAndre didn't break a run longer than 15 yards. I'm not denying the effort. And again, I'm going to give Notre Dame credit because I think that's the best tackling team I've seen since 2017 Georgia. I was really impressed with the Irish's open field tackling. It defies the numbers. I don't know how they ranked 120th in the nation in run defense coming in, regardless of what type of run game they were facing. So a lot of credit to Notre Dame. But, Georgia didn't have any explosive plays running the football. 16 yards was the longest run. To me, that's not a pass. To me, I'm not going to call it a fail, but that's not a pass to me. They did secure the ball, but I would have been okay with James Cook touching the ball more than once. To me, that was also egregious. When you've got a playmaker like that, and Kirby addressed that, getting the ball in space. I mean, I don't know, but I wonder how much of that BA had to do with Cook lining up more in the slot because of the injuries, and I wonder if that took him a little bit out of the backfield a little bit. But I would have liked to have seen Cook get a crack, or Zamir, or maybe even Kenny, because I don't know if these guys can break the long run against Notre Dame and somebody sees something a little different. But that offense was searching a little bit, I thought.
Let me finish up with this. I don't know where this came from, but I guess some UGA fans were a little surprised. You didn't like the light show on Saturday? I'm not sure where this is coming from, but a few people had asked me to ask you about this, that you weren't happy with the light display, the red lights and the flashing stadium lights on Saturday. Where is that coming from? I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I didn't like it. What I said is I'm not sure I like it during the game. And I think we're probably going to see, not because it's my rule, but I think we may see something about doing that during the course of play. It struck me that you went from flashing strobe lights right to the lights turned up and playing football again within a minute and a half. And I don't know, I guess the NHL does that a little bit. I love the light show. Don't get me wrong. I think those lights were amazing. I got on my Facebook page. I've got a picture of it on my Facebook page. It was such an incredible setting to see those red lights. But not that close to play, not during play. I think I'm a pregame, a postgame, a halftime, maybe, but I don't know about doing it during timeouts and things like that. I wondered if that detracted or if it affected. I mean, that was my question. Like I said, I kind of want to see the football game, and my thought was, was it too close to the playing time? Not was it a good show? It was a hell of a show. I think it's great George did it, and I think it's something everybody should be proud of. But I'm just not sure if we're going to see it again, 30 seconds before they leave the sideline for a play.
So just to follow up on that, shouldn't Georgia do everything that it can to create a home field advantage, though?
Oh, and did they ever? But it had more to do with the noise. It's funny. I'm working on a story right now on Havoc Rate, BA.
Yeah.
And Kirby can include those 5-yard penalties that the crowd was causing. I mean, there was 6 Havoc plays right there coming from the Georgia fan base when you think about it. They cost Georgia 5 yards, and I don't know what value you put on burning a timeout, but if you want to call that a Havoc play, that's 9 Havoc plays that the Georgia – I think Georgia should print up T-shirts and say, I created Havoc for all the fans. I'm serious. They did. They created Havoc. They created play loss, lost yardage, and down and distance situations, just like the sack on a first down, or just like a pass breakup. I mean, they affected Notre Dame greatly. So, that was my impression. And the fans. Like I said, sometimes I roll my eyes, not at Georgia, but just in general with fans and say, we got the greatest home crowd, we're the best. Everybody says they're the best. But you know what? Georgia fans really proved it. I mean, they really, really did make a difference. I mean, if you were in that game, you were a part of that victory. Because I contend that if there's not 6 false starts and 3 burn timeouts, I'm not sure that Georgia wins. I saw the crowd make a difference. And I can't point to another game where I would say the crowd has had that much impact in all my years of covering college football at any level, any playoff game, any championship game, anywhere. I've never seen a crowd make the impact that Georgia did. I can't believe I'm saying it, because but it happened. It happened right before my eyes.
Well, there you go, Mike. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate you being here. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com, and thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union today.
Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Listen, my rule on something like this is just as simple and straightforward as it can be. If it's bothering Notre Dame, then good. And I don't say that just as a Georgia partisan, but just in college football in general. I mean, how many years has Georgia been going up to Columbia, South Carolina, for instance, that rooster crow playing and, cock-a-doodle-doodling all the way to the snap? I mean, teams have been looking for that whatever home field advantage they can get for quite some time, and this is just the next iteration of that in my mind. And ultimately it's the crowd noise that's the bigger impact on Notre Dame, but certainly the lights seem to egg on the crowd a little bit, and I don't mind that. It's part of the reason why Alabama fans have been pouting so much this week, because Georgia got a chance to put this show on first. It's a DawgNation Daily presented by Georgia United Credit Union. We got some SEC stuff to do. Then we're going to hear more from Kirby Smart before we're done here today. Before that, let me also remind you about my friends at MyBookie. Great time to get involved with MyBookie. This weekend there's no Georgia game to watch. Sometimes you tune into the other games. You don't really have much of a rooting interest one way or another. Get a little action down on one side or the other. You better believe I have some rooting interest in. That's a fun way to do it, and MyBookie's a great place to do that with. They're going to give you a big first deposit bonus. They may double your first deposit. You can get up to $1,000, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. It's all one word, spelled the way it's supposed to be. DAWG, the promo code DawgNation. get you in at MyBookie. You just type that into your browser, MyBookie. You search MyBookie, you find it. Use the promo code DawgNation, get a big-time first deposit bonus, and then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. They've also got great player perks. They've got opportunity to kind of, you can do some fantasy stuff like betting over, under fantasy points, teasers, parlays, all the stuff you'd expect. It's there at MyBookie, but you've got to use the promo code DawgNation. All right, I've gotten a lot of Twitter stuff about this over the last couple of days, so apparently this is turning into a little bit of a thing. I knew it was going to be certainly talked about, and there's obviously a lot of Georgia fans excited about going to Neyland Stadium next Saturday. I guess there's also kind of a desire. You know how Tennessee has done the checkerboard thing before? Some Georgia fans are thinking if they get enough fans in the stadium, they can also do a red and black version of the checkerboard there at Neyland Stadium. If you're watching on video, I've gotten a few of these lately. Here is one from our buddy Sugar Ray. And what I like about Sugar Ray's red and black checkerboard of Neyland Stadium, first of all, how much time does this take? This is pretty amazing. Great job by Sugar Ray. He's also got the DawgNation logo where the video board at Neyland Stadium would be. He's got a Georgia G right there in the middle. This is a really, really good job by our buddy Sugar Ray. It's Sugar Ray for UGA on Twitter. So good job by him. And I'm guessing we'll see at least 20,000 Georgia fans in Knoxville. Is that at least 20,000, right? And there were 20 grand in LSU last year, so there'll be at least 20,000 fans in Knoxville. Is it enough to checkerboard the stadium? I don't quite know about that, but I wouldn't, I guess, put it past right now. Now, speaking of Tennessee, reports coming out of a couple of Vols players entering the transfer portal. Shannon Reed, Jaquez Jones doing that. There's also been some rumors here of some others going in as well, and some of the names, and I'm not going to mention them here because it's unfounded. It's just rumors. But some of the names I've heard kicked around also potentially considering transfers. These are names you might know a little more of and might be a little bit more aware of. And we are in that kind of 4-game threshold of college football where guys are thinking about that. And there's some debate going on about should I stay and should I go. And programs like Tennessee right now that are kind of having fallen on the hardest of times, they're going to deal with that more. So keep your eye out for Knoxville and what comes out of that. A couple names reportedly into the transfer portal. There could be more on the way. I saw this, and I mentioned this. This is also kind of an unfounded rumor, but a guy with a blue check tweeted it, so I guess it's got to be worth something. Brenton Cox in Gainesville. Can I see this for a second? It's a TV guy there. It's Ben Murphy, local TV guy, I believe from Jacksonville, who says rumblings of Brenton Cox getting cleared to play flowing on the internet machine today. Now, I'm not so sure if you're Ben Murphy, if that's going to be the source for a news report. I'm only mentioning it because he did. I don't think there's anything to this. I don't think, because certainly there have not been any more substantial reports coming out of Gainesville on this. In fact, I believe there was one report at least from a local Florida reporter that Cox was still working scout team right now, which would mean if he was on his way to being cleared, he probably would not be doing that. So I'm not quite sure how that rumor got started at once, but it was big enough anyway that a local TV guy down there was talking about that. But I'm not quite so sure there's anything to that. I cited yesterday some information from a guy named Brian Fremo. He also had something else on Twitter yesterday that I wanted to point out. So the way these analytics guys work is they take, yards per play, points per drive, things like that, and they kind of sort of, stir that up into a formula. It becomes kind of an efficiency rating for various teams. And when you compare one team's efficiency to another, you end up with a pretty good prediction of win-loss record. These things are normally pretty close to the end of the season win-loss record, with some variance, and sometimes it can be a great deal of variance, but it's at least a pretty good measuring stick for how teams are expected to do. And Brian Fremo tweeted out from Football Outsiders a reminder that despite the fact that Auburn's currently undefeated and Florida's still currently undefeated, they, along with a handful of other teams, are still, according to the analytics, the number crunchers, still expected to lose at least 3 games before the end of the season. Actually, it's like 3 point something, so more than 3 games. So pretty fast start here for Auburn, but the analytics folks think they still have tough games to come. Florida much the same way, and that's not too different from what our predictions would be there as well. Just kind of wanted to point that out. And then one more thing on our SEC through as a follow-up to yesterday. I saw an interesting statement from, Derek King, the quarterback from Houston, who is taking a red shirt, and we kind of openly speculated yesterday of, is he about to be a hot free agent, much the same way Kelly Bryant would have been leaving Clemson a year ago, King leaving Houston. he did come out with a strongly worded statement, basically pledging his loyalty to Houston, saying, teams may come after me, but I'm not going anywhere. He also said, I can't go anywhere, which I'm not quite sure what that means. But he had a very strongly worded statement that said he was staying at Houston. Does this put the rumor to bed that he might be a quarterback that a team in the market for a grad transfer, possibly Georgia, maybe Alabama, some of these other high-profile teams, does that put that to bed that he could be one of those guys? I would say anything is possible in college football, so I'm not quite so sure that statement closes the door on this, but it was interesting to hear him be as strongly worded about that as he was. We'll make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union, I want to turn our attention back to Kirby Smart here just for a moment. And I was playing some audio a little earlier. I want to get to the fake injury thing in a minute. Before we get to that, though, I was playing some audio earlier of Kirby Smart kind of candidly addressing some of the topics, some of the issues that fans had, not necessarily critical of Kirby Smart on, but just curious about. And I think one of those curiosities was, hey, late in the game when you have a lead, do you go for the kill? Do you – and there was at least one national media guy that said Kirby plays it too safe late in the game when he has leads and trying to connect the dots between what happened for Georgia against Notre Dame to some of the recent losses to Alabama in the SEC championship or the national championship game. You can decide for yourself how much merit that has, but it's at least a curiosity forming around Smart this week. Are you aggressive enough late in the games, and how do you balance the need to protect the lead, not do something stupid, with making sure you keep your pedal on the pedal to the metal and fight for the win the entirety of the game? Smart was asked about that, and once again, pretty candid response. Here's Kirby again.
I don't think it's a real tough balance. Depends on what you're doing defensively. Is it 38-34, or is it 14-10? You know what I mean? There's really two different type games. What kind of quarterback are you playing? Been in a lot of games where I've been on them headphones saying, it ain't ever over. You better score all you can score. You know what I mean? Then I've been in those games before where, like the Auburn one here a couple years ago, 2 years ago or something. I mean, it was neither team could really do anything. And it was a matter of I'm playing to win this game and not have a defense screw it up. So I think you have both those, and you got to go with the flow of the game.
So once again, maybe it's not exactly the answer you'd want from Kirby, but the fact that he's entertaining the question and talking about his thought process publicly, I think is a really good thing. I think this kind of issue is going to hang over Smart's head like it would any high-profile coach, but he's certainly taking the issue head on. Don't forget it's flu season, and Kroger's got you covered with your flu vaccination. No appointments needed. That's a good thing. And here's something that's even better. A copay can be as low as $0. So learn more about this by going to Kroger.com/flu. Kroger.com/flu. One more thing from Kirby Smart before we get out of here. Obviously another one of the hot topics going back to Saturday was the allegations of Notre Dame faking injuries. Yeah, if you're watching a video, I mean, the video I think speaks for itself that this is clearly an attempt to slow Georgia down and make sure make sure you basically stop play here. I think the video speaks for itself. Brian Kelly, I think, has had a pretty insincere attempt at explaining away the actions of his team. Credit to Kirby Smart yesterday for not exactly letting Kelly and the Irish off the hook. Here's Kirby Smart on the topic. Okay, we don't have that, but Kirby did address this yesterday, basically saying it's not his place to say if he thought Notre Dame was faking the injuries or not. He says it does go on in college football, but he certainly didn't take any of the heat off Notre Dame for this. And honestly, this kind of gamesmanship is probably part of the sport, but when it happens against your team, if you're Kirby Smart, I think, and if it gets caught on video, and if it's maybe a coach that you don't mind seeing squirm a little bit, I think the way that Kirby Smart behaved on this yesterday is exactly the way it's supposed to be and exactly the way that he's supposed to do it. So pretty good stuff there from Kirby Smart. If you go to the DawgNation YouTube page, you can actually hear Smart's answer on that. All right, as we get ready to wrap up here, I wanted to show you this for a moment if you're on video, and I apologize if you're podcast radio right now. Young Georgia fan named Wright drew me this picture and gave it to me Saturday as part of our DawgNation Express tailgate. We had such a good time at our DawgNation Express tailgate. I had a chance to meet so many really nice people. And one of the cool things about my job is I get gifts from time to time. I thought this was a really cool drawing of a Georgia Bulldog and some of the rivals. You see LSU over here, Kentucky, Auburn, I see a Mississippi State Bulldog, a South Carolina Chicken, Vanderbilt Commodore, Georgia Tech. Georgia just kind of vanquishing a lot of its foes here. This is a really cool drawing, and it's going to have a prominent spot for me right there next to some of the other cool things that I've been given by so many of you. And so I really appreciate all of your generosity, right in particular here today. By the way, it's been 1,061 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. We think that's good news, and we'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cooldown. We'll give you a chance to weigh in on anything you want to from today's program. And, of course, I'll remind you that R.S. Andrews delivers smiles. They can deliver a smile for you, whether you have some sort of air conditioning need. And let's face it, this week you probably do. It's 100 degrees outside once again. Heating issue, it's maybe a little bit later on. Water issues, those can happen anytime. Plumbing, I mean. Water heater going out or any kind of plumbing thing. You know, let's face it, those plumbing things can be, that can be tough. Electrical issue. You got some sort of electrical wiring that's not working the right way. A lot of those systems behind your house, behind the walls, that's not always easy to see. R.S. Andrews can do good work for you. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. One of the reasons why DawgNation recommends R.S. Andrews. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. And with that said, we will get into your comments. Jennifer Caldwell Sperlin, I could not agree with you more. If Facebook would allow me to, I'd like this comment 10 million times. I'm so tired of this heat, man. It's rough. I love Georgia. I do not love Georgia this time of year. I don't. I really don't. Somebody here said that. This is kind of interesting. So we've had an issue lately with Facebook. The audio goes out. And what we've been told is that, first of all, you might just like it better on YouTube because that doesn't seem to be an issue over there. And the audio issue on Facebook is one of those things that doesn't affect everybody and doesn't affect everybody at the same time. It just sort of sporadically impacts people. But I have heard from some of our audience that if you'll get out of Facebook and get back in, a lot of times that'll make it better. Jimmy Guthrie also says that if you disable the shake to report a problem thing, that works there as well. And I didn't start seeing the shake to report a problem thing until Saturday because normally with our shows, I obviously use a laptop. But when we're on remote, in Athens, for instance, I'll use a phone. And that shake to report a problem pops up all the time. So maybe that is the issue, Jimmy. I don't know. Some of y'all would know that better than me. Travis Baltiger says if your offense scores too fast, it keeps your defense on the field. That may be why Kirby plays conservative for his defense. I think, Travis, that's certainly probably part of it. I do think that Kirby Smart's a defensive-minded head coach, and I think that people have tendencies, and I think that Kirby's tendency is going to want to be to protect his defense. I think that's probably true. And as Kirby said a moment ago, in the audio that you heard, there is a balance here of you've got to be aggressive enough to win the game, but you don't want to be, aggressive to the point of causing yourself a problem because, like most things in football and most things in life, the door can swing too far one way or another. I think that's a really good point. James Bryant says Facebook also doesn't notify you anymore when the show is on, hasn't for weeks. James, that's really weird because that's also something we can't control. Facebook just sort of randomly chooses who it notifies and who it doesn't. Am I saying that right? That Facebook just sort of randomly notifies people on that? Why are you shaking your head no?
I mean, I get a notification every time.
But James Bryant says that he doesn't.
I mean, I don't know what James Bryant's settings are for his Facebook account.
Well, all he said was that he used to get one, hasn't gotten one in a week.
All
right, thanks.
Not an electrician.
Thanks. Appreciate your help. Jacob O'Neill says, I get notified every day. Sonia and Leon says they do as well. It's not that, it's not a big deal that one way or another. But I was just going by what he said. Let me go over to YouTube here for a moment and get some comments over there and find out what people are doing. Over on the YouTube side of things, VTW says we need more night games at Sanford Stadium. And VTW, I think that's probably a pretty good point. I think a lot of UGA fans probably agree with that there as well. I also think I start to wonder if now day games, especially the noon variety of the day games, they become an even tougher sell. Now that there's the comparison of how great great things are at night, does it become an even tougher sell for some of the day games? I think that becomes a very interesting question of, night games have always been so much more attractive to the point where Alabama was even complaining about this a couple of weeks ago. I start to wonder if that's going to become an even even tougher sell from now on. Dwayne G says, I wish James Cook would have gotten more touches. I'm assuming he means against Notre Dame. And yeah, I mean, Cook has certainly proven himself to be a weapon. And when you look at the issues that teams like Notre Dame, or really a lot of the teams that Georgia face, they are obviously going to try to stop Georgia between the tackles first and take away the thing that Georgia wants to do most. And it's interesting to know that a lot of the success that Georgia had running the ball late in the game was, kind of coming, between the tackles and using that big offensive line. Cook would seem to be a pretty good counterbalance to that. And I think a lot of Georgia fans would like to see him more involved in big games like this in the future. And maybe you get a chance to do that. Jermaine Jones also says that Cook needs the ball more.
Look, as the number one James Cook defender on the show from the offseason, I certainly understand their point. But, the quote Kirby had last night, when DeAndre Swift is playing as well as he was on Saturday, do you really want to take the ball out of his hands? The answer is no. Georgia only ran 59 plays in that game. And, between Jake Fromm had 26 passing attempts. And factor in Swift's touches, that's passes and catches, it's 21 attempts. There's only a finite number of touches you can have go around. And I think with Swift playing as well as he was, I certainly am not going to fault Kirby Smart for giving it to a guy who, as much as talent and upside as guys like Cook and White have, we don't know how they're going to perform on sort of a big stage like that. Whereas, Kirby knows what he has in DeAndre Swift. Swift showed it all night on Saturday.
Chandler Johnson says the only challenge with night games is waiting all day to see the dogs. It is kind of funny on Saturday. We were pretty busy because we obviously have a couple shows we have to do. We had the DawgNation Express tailgate. But something about the 8 o'clock start compared to even some of like the 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock start that Georgia have had on night games in recent years, something about that made it seem even later. It was really kind of interesting that it did sort of feel like we were waiting all day for that game. And so in general, I do like the night games, but sometimes it does feel like you're waiting a little while. That's a pretty good point, Chandler. More comments here on Facebook. Ken Blankenship checking in to say the sweep and screen have been losing us yardage. Yeah, I mean, obviously there were a couple of instances of that on Saturday, and one of the plays in particular to Cook, where they did go for the kind of the speed sweep thing for him, and that didn't quite work out. Notre Dame seemed to have that one well played and well scouted. Ken, that's a pretty good point. Matt Talley says, I had to take a power nap last Saturday to make it to 8 p.m. Had to start all over to get my buzz right for the game. There's no buzz for me on game days anymore because I'm working, but a lot of these games that start really late, I mean, sometimes they give me a hard time, but it really is true. I go to bed pretty early on a normal day, and I normally have to kind of power load a little caffeine there late to make sure I'm as sharp as I need to be in the second half. Now, an exciting game like Notre Dame, that's not quite so difficult to do, but Vanderbilt in the second half, I definitely was starting to feel a little bit of the effect of the later game there. Myra Herbert Bush says, had a wonderful time on DawgNation Express. Myra, that's awesome to hear. I really appreciate you being a part of that. Really appreciate that. Matt Rukavino on Facebook says, if it's a playoff situation versus Clemson or Ohio State, we're going to have to be more aggressive. Don't give those teams the ball with the game on the line. And, Matt, that's really very similar to what I've been saying really throughout the entirety of the calendar year, the long off season that kind of started in January up until now, that when the games matter most, when the margin is more razor thin, the willingness to be aggressive offensively, I think, is going to determine those games a little bit more. I think that Georgia has built itself a program, and this should not be discounted. Georgia has built itself a program that, for the most part, has eliminated close games from the regular season. One of the things that makes Saturday significant was there have just been so few of these games between the one Georgia played against Notre Dame now and the one that it played against Notre Dame in September of 2017. The overwhelming majority of games in between those two spans have been, well, maybe Georgia wasn't quite as impressive as it could have been, but the other team had no chance of winning. And so I think Georgia deserves credit for making the regular season as easy as it can be. But when games aren't easy, to use your example, when you're playing in Alabama, when you're playing in Clemson, when you're playing teams like that, when you're in those kinds of situations, I do think it requires a little bit different style of play. I do, and I think you make a pretty good point on that. John Chappell says, out here in California, I get up early and start my viewing date at 9 a.m. College football all day long and into the night. I would have to say, John, I'm pretty envious of that because, like Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football, things like that, to take away from Georgia for a moment. I almost just never get to finish those World Series games. If the Braves aren't involved, there's no way I'm staying up till 1 a.m. to watch a World Series game anymore. I'm just not. Sometimes I think when I move towards retirement or something like that, go living out west. So like you said, I think the NFL games start at 10 a.m. The second crop starts at 1 p.m. I guess that puts your night game at what, like 4 or 5 p.m., something like that. I mean, I'd love, and college football the same way. I mean, you got game day coming on 6 a.m. That's perfect for me. Wake up, have my first cup of coffee, and watch college game day at 6 a.m., and then have a whole bunch of games that roll through the rest of the day. And then by the time you get to your normal prime time, it's the Pac-12 games going on, and 70-68 or whatever the final score is going to be there. I have to say I'm pretty jealous of that. Ricky Jett says the addition of Cager and Wolf have been huge. Yeah. I'm a big believer in transfer player. I'm a big believer that if you take a player, and I'm going to use air quotes here, that seem to have average production at one school and you put them on a talented team like Georgia, I just think it's a lot easier to be a lot better. And, this is one of those things where normally I don't try to say things quite as trite as trust the coaches, but if Georgia's going after an Eli Wolf, they know something. If they're going after a Lawrence Cager, they know something. That doesn't mean that every transfer they bring in is going to work out. Georgia's batting average on this isn't perfect. You can think of a couple of examples yourself of transfers that they brought in that didn't quite end up making the impact you might would have thought. But they were all shots worth taking because for the most part, these are scholarships only affect you for 1 year. And when you have a guy like Cager who did catch touchdowns at Miami a year ago, that's a skill set that can be useful. That's a guy that's proven it with production. In the case of Wolf, who's more productive at Georgia than he was at Tennessee, that's also an example of Georgia wouldn't be going after him unless they'd seen something from him. Kirby has addressed the leadership quotient that he brings to the table and things like that. So yeah. I would agree with you on that. Back over here on YouTube for a minute, then we're gonna get off. Devin Glenn says watch the press conferences, and yeah, you can watch those. We have all those up on the DawgNation YouTube page. Connor does a good job of getting those up. So if you want to see like the full sort of unvarnished, unedited version of what Kirby has to say, because the honest truth is we only have time to sort of show so much or play so much for you here on DawgNation Daily. We're only going to get the highlights. A lot of the stuff, the more granular, things we'll just never have time to do here. It's one of the reasons why the full press conferences themselves are as popular as they are. GB2 says, BA, do you feel this game was close, really? I mean, Notre Dame got a field goal in 42 minutes of play. If you take away the fumble punt touchdown. So, yeah, obviously, if you take away the special teams miscue, then that changes the tone of the game pretty significantly. I think that you can't completely take that away, though. I mean, what you want is to be what Georgia was, about 2 touchdowns better than Notre Dame, and a big mistake, turn it into a one-score game. That's about what you want to be. I agree with something else that Kirby said yesterday that, or at least he alluded to this, we didn't have time to play this today, that, he likes it when games are not close. That, a lot of the media wants to make it into a narrative of, boy, Georgia proved its championship mettle by going out there and playing, Notre Dame, tooth and nail, play for play, and ending up winning a close game. I think if Kirby Smart were sitting here and being honest, he'd say, well, adversity is a good thing to overcome. You really prove your championship mettle by going out and obliterating opponents. And Georgia, certainly the game would have felt different if the Simmons fumble hadn't happened. And so I think it's overall should be taken as a good thing that Georgia was able to withstand that kind of miscue, because we said this a lot last week. Georgia is not impervious to mistakes. No one is. Some people want to kind of attach some sort of causation to Simmons dropping the fumble. The truth is fumbles get dropped occasionally. McCole dropped one last year, at least one that I can remember. Mistakes are going to happen. Your quarterback's going to throw the football at some point in time. It's going to bounce off an offensive lineman's helmet. It's going to shoot straight up in the air, and whoever lands on it is it's as good a guess as anyone. No one's impervious to mistake. What you want to be, though, is comfortably enough ahead of your opponent that one mistake doesn't change the tone of a game. That's why over the course of time, if you look at one-score games, teams that win by a touchdown or less, over the course of time, every team is going to win about half those games, going to lose about half those games. Even like the great team, what makes the Alabamas, the Clemsons, I'll add Georgia in this list a little bit too. What makes them great is the fact they don't play a lot of one score. You don't see a ton of examples of teams consistently being good in close games. What you see is great teams consistently avoiding them. Green Soldier says, I think Coley is learning alongside the players. He dialed up a couple screens and jet sweeps that, if blocked correctly, go for a big gain. It may be true about that. I think also to our own eye, and sometimes play calling is one of those things that can be a little bit difficult to really evaluate in real time because we notice certain things more outsized than others. But the fact that Georgia did kind of put its foot on the gas and start to play a little faster in the second half, that was clearly an adjustment that Notre Dame was having some trouble with. So that's an example of certainly Coley attempting to put his impact on the game. Connor, you were in Athens yesterday. You got anything you want to say?
No, with regard to the tempo and the faking injuries thing, Kelly made some comments that Georgia doesn't usually play fast, which for the most part they don't, but 2 or 3 times this season they have sort of gone tempo. And, with Kelly's comments, I'm kind of like, well, yeah, they don't usually go fast, but they were as an adjustment. And in response to that, you told your guys to go down and sort of, try and slow down the play. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think it's all sort of part of the game, and if you can get away with it and have them not get flagged, which the first one almost certainly should have, and because the first one was so egregious, I think the second one probably could have gotten flagged as well, just given where the player went down. But, as far as like being upset about it or calling Notre Dame classless, I just think, hey, there's a certain line you can go up to, and if you can, push that line and sort of push the boundaries of what you can get away with, you should go for it.
Jonathan Anderson says, BA, thoughts on tempo, help increase the number of offensive plays to get more touches to Cook, White, Pickens, etc. So, to my knowledge, Georgia, for the last couple of years, almost always tried to go tempo, for instance, at the end of a half, because that's an opportunity to be fast without a whole lot of consequence. Because ultimately, Jonathan, I'm a big believer that the reason why Georgia doesn't do that more is because with big offensive linemen, you do run the risk of tiring them out a bit, and then you would potentially diminish what's supposed to be one of your greatest strengths. And also you could potentially put your defense in a little bit of a bind if a fast possession doesn't go anywhere. All of a sudden, by the time these big defensive players have sat down on the bench to catch themselves a little Powerade, all of a sudden they're being called back in the game again. So ultimately, there's no free lunch in life, right? We all know that. And so while on the one hand, playing more fast consistently would benefit you in one area, I think the Georgia coaches rightly believe it would hurt them in another area, and the ways in which it would hurt them, I believe they think are more important than the ways in which it would help, and I'm not necessarily one to disagree on that.
I mean, you only have to look back to the Vanderbilt game to start this year. Georgia, tried to go hurry up right before halftime thinking it would work. It didn't. Georgia had to end up punting the ball back to Vanderbilt, and because there was still enough time because they were trying to go fast, Vanderbilt had time to go down and drive and kick a field goal right before halftime. Now, obviously, that didn't end up mattering, but you have to think about sort of the consequences of that over the course of the game.
Seth Auld says, how much longer do Bush and Landers continue to get reps when they should go to Pickens and Blaylock? The Bush thing, I'm not as
Bush
sure.
Isn't even dressing. He's gotten injuries. So.
He's been banged up a little bit, but Landers certainly in the game a lot on Saturday. And I would obviously guess that one option that Kirby's going to have for himself this year that he probably hasn't had the last couple of years, where you had guys who were your blocking receivers and guys who were your, playmaking receivers. This year, what you've seen from Pickens, and Kirby talked about this yesterday too, is a pretty good willingness to go out there and block a little bit. Blaylock has a reputation of being a physical receiver, going back to even some of his time in high school. And I know he missed one pretty high-profile block in one of the games earlier in the year and kind of got called out for Kirby Smart on it. But I do believe as the season goes on, the one thing that Kirby won't have to do this year that he maybe felt like he had to do in previous years, which was change his wide receiver personnel depending on what he wanted them to do. Did he want them to block or did he want them to go out and catch footballs? 2017 is a perfect example of this. Trey Blount, who I believe can catch the ball, but has been primarily used as a blocking receiver, played a lot that year because Georgia needed another blocking receiver. I think this year, one of the evolutions of the Georgia wide receiver corps, which I think is a really good thing, is that your blocking receivers and your playmaking receivers are a little closer to being the same guys. So hopefully you can make decisions on playing time the rest of the season simply on the basis of merit. And maybe as that takes shape, maybe Georgia fans will get to see the guys on the field they want to see.
You talked last week about you personally wanting to see a lot of Robertson, Blaylock, and Pickens sort of wide receiver sets. We kind of sort of saw that a little bit, but instead of Robertson, it was Cager. And I sort of wrote this morning, looking through the first 4 games and especially relying on that Notre Dame game, I think a clear pecking order has started to emerge as far as a top 4 of, and in no particular order right now, Cager, Robertson, Blaylock, and Pickens, with Robertson probably being a little bit better of a blocker than Blaylock is right now, so you might see him more earlier on first and second downs, whereas Blaylock probably going to maybe be the guy that comes in on longer passing downs and sort of, quick and sort of up-tempo routes.
I know it's been hyped up. I just don't think that you can overstate it, though. What Cager did for Georgia on Saturday, that willingness to, that ability to beat a man in one-on-one situation, go up and make the play, it is very difficult to put a price tag on that. It is very difficult to put a price tag on that.
5 targets, 5 catches.
Yeah.
Caught the ball every time it was thrown to him.
That's a very, very impressive
And, I mean, the touchdown catch, he had a guy draped all over him. The two catches previously on that same drive, he had guys draped all over him. Very, very impressive game for Cager. Is that, from a wide receiver standpoint, was Cager's performance on Saturday the most impressive in the Kirby Smart era by a wide receiver?
I certainly think you can make a case for that. I mean, what would have been Wims' biggest game? It would have been late in the season, and it probably wouldn't have been in a close game.
Maybe Oklahoma? Didn't he have a touchdown catch in the Oklahoma game?
Maybe so. I'm also remembering. I remember Godwin having a couple big plays in that game too. Could have been.
He had a huge third down catch on the game tying drive in that game.
But I mean, Cager gave Georgia what it really, really needed, because for as much as you want to say, and y'all know how I feel about Pickens, as much as you want to say about the fact he got pass interfered or whatever, I mean, Cager had guys draped all over him too, and he just made the catch. And I'm not saying that means that Pickens won't make those catches later on this year, but there's something to be said for hauling it in, and he really did that. Our buddy Ken Blankenship also mentioning Devod Wilson, and it's not for me just the interception from Wilson. He seemed to be really all over the place on Saturday, even apart from that. I was really, really happy with what I saw from him. Very, very impressive.
All 3 Notre Dame drives in the third quarter ended because of Devod Wilson. He had an interception. He had a tackle that prevented Notre Dame from getting a first down in an impressive one-on-one situation. And then he had a pass breakup. A very, very impressive game from Devod Wilson, especially when the cornerback situation was what it was.
Clarence Dawson says no one talking about the non-PI calls in the end zone. I mean, I will say that I don't know that what DJ Daniel did get flagged for was all that much worse than what a lot of the Notre Dame guys didn't get flagged for. But just as a general philosophical rule, I'm like the last guy in the world you're going to hear come in here and talk about, officiating calls. I just think it's kind of a maddening discussion, even on Saturday when it seemed to be a little bit of a trend. For me, that's just kind of a maddening discussion. So, Clarence, I probably will be someone that doesn't talk about some of that kind of stuff as much as you want, even though on the case of Pickens in particular, it certainly seemed like he had, kind of somebody, certainly an arm affecting his arm. I'm just kind of the last guy that talks to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan, because if you want to really do it in Zapruder style a game, you can go back and find holdings, illegal downfield contact on sort of every single play and sort of paint the refs as poor, and no matter how the game was actually called. So, I certainly there were missed calls. The part of football, you got to sort of play around that and try and win sometimes in spite of that. And Georgia did that on Saturday.
David Caper says Cager's our Wims. Fromm's going to connect with him on those back shoulder throws, which obviously Wims made famous in 2017. He goes on to say it's going to be in big moments the rest of the season. Here's what I will say, though. While one of those throws was, I think, pretty clearly a back shoulder type throw, kind of the start and stop move from Cager on that. One of those for me was a lot more of just, hey, let me just go up and get the football. Let me just go up there and win a battle one-on-one. So I understand what you're saying. Some of that work they were doing together was reminiscent of what Wims had done in 2017. Some of that, though, was just an athlete going up and being an athlete, which I thought was really, really nice to see. Kathy Aquavia Green says, where do people get the notion that Cager transferred because he wasn't getting reps at Miami? Yeah, I mean, Cager's like a lot of guys. You just want to change the scenery. And if you have a chance to go from what you think is a good team to a better team, or I should say not such a good team to a better team, that's the kind of thing that most guys are going to want to do. And as I said before, the batting average on this kind of stuff is not going to be 100%. but there was always some reason to feel pretty good about Cager because he had caught touchdowns. On a bad team with kind of shaky quarterback play, he had caught touchdowns, and that always gave him a chance. Didn't mean he was going to be a sure thing here at Georgia, and he's obviously still a part of a pretty competitive situation at wide receiver, but that was going to give him a chance. And, I would have said the same thing about, Jay Hayes, by the way, because Hayes had 7 tackles in the game against Georgia back in 2017. Now, he came over here, didn't quite work out quite as well, but you didn't really lose much for taking that risk, especially in a year when you needed a defensive lineman. Georgia needed a wide receiver this year. They didn't stand to lose a lot by bringing in Cager, but the upside could potentially be pretty high.
Right, yeah, and because Cager was brought in before the Jeremiah Holloman stuff happened, and if Georgia hadn't had the foresight to go out and try and just get at worst an extra body, you really wonder where that wide receiver core would sort of be right now. Because now it's a little bit more stable. They have a guy who's been through some wars, who can sort of help Pickens and Blaylock sort of not put as much pressure on them, especially early in the season, like that Notre Dame game that they had.
Joseph Kennedy says our run defense is great, but our pass defense is a suspect. Listen, I think that Georgia got themselves in trouble on Saturday with a really good tight end. Other than that, though, I think you got to give the cornerbacks credit for, you brought in Tyreek McGee. He kind of held his own. You obviously, you knew you were going to be without Tyson Campbell. That situation seemed to work out okay. I'm not saying you can't subtract away what Cole Kmet did to Georgia on Saturday, but that was a pretty Herculean performance by one guy in particular. I still feel pretty good about Georgia's defensive secondary. I'm going to tell you the same thing about DJ Daniel, who did get flagged for pass interference on Saturday, but I'm going to tell you the same thing about him that I said a lot about Tyson Campbell last year. The fact that you were able to play Daniel as much as you were in such a high-profile game where Notre Dame knew they had to throw it a good bit if they wanted to kind of keep it with Georgia because of the fact that they knew their running game was probably going to struggle. The fact that you got Daniel that kind of experience, I think that's an invaluable resource for him later on in the year. I do. And I'll be curious to see if the Georgia rush defense does hold up, because it's going to be tested. Coming up against Auburn, for instance, it's running the football pretty well. And
best in terms of yards per game, best rushing team in the SEC right now.
So let's see, hopefully this is the case, but let's see if that Georgia rushing defense does hold up, because that was one of the things you would say, well, so far in 2019, one of the issues we had going back to 2018, well, that seems to be an improvement. Keshawn Vaughn had like 5 yards to carry, but he didn't have a huge game necessarily against Georgia. But, the Georgia rush defense was certainly impactful on Saturday. So I probably agree with you on the rush defense thus far. I'm not too down on this Georgia pass defense. Now, I was glad to hear Kirby talk as much as he did yesterday about the, I guess, lack of pass disruptions, pass pressure disruptions. It was interesting to hear him address that. I guess I just think Notre Dame had a pretty good scheme on that. Georgia came within an eyelash of getting a sack to close out the game, which would have obviously been a pretty big deal. That is one of those areas in which Georgia needs to be a little bit better against Power 5 competition, because it's obviously dominated the sack department, the tackle for loss department against the 2 lesser opponents that it's played. Didn't do as much of that against Vanderbilt, and did not do as much of that against Notre Dame. So that's one area where it was also kind of interesting to hear Kirby be candid. We're going to talk more about that later on the week here at DawgNation Daily.
I think the havoc, especially the Power 5 notion and points you've brought up, I think that's really going to change with the Tennessee game, just given that, Tennessee's offensive line isn't very good, and, Georgia should jump all over them early, and that's going to really put Tennessee in a bad situation.
Nicholas King asked a really good question. This is a really good question. Who's the best quarterback left on Georgia's schedule? It's probably not Mon to me, which is one of the names that Nicholas mentions. Mon's just not played
it's
great.
It's not Garantano either.
Not Garantano either. He's certainly not lived up to what I said he had a chance to be able to do. Kelly Bryant's an interesting name. I'm not actually all that sure what Bryant's numbers are even like this season. Trask. Nicholas, here's how I'll say this. I think it'll be very interesting to see what Bo Nix has grown into by November. Right now, Nix is the kind of quarterback that doesn't necessarily get you beat. Other than the throw that he made against Oregon, though, he's not necessarily the kind of quarterback you're going to just put the entire game on his shoulders to go out there and try to beat somebody else. So he's good enough not to get Auburn beat. Is he good enough yet to, certainly they're not trusting him the same way that they trusted Jake Fromm in the late stages of his freshman season. At least not yet, I don't think, although Gus Malzahn certainly praises him at every turn. I think it'll be very interesting to see what Nix looks like by November. As of now, this is an average quarterback, but a talented freshman getting more and more experience by the day, that could be interesting to see right then. Although Dimitri Sullivan says hands down it's Kelly Bryant.
I've got the stats pulled up here. Bo Nix completing 53.8% of his passes, 6.2 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Now he's played 2 Power 5 teams that probably make those a little bit worse, and both of those were away from Auburn. The answer is pretty clearly Kelly Bryant. Completing 65% of his passes, 8.1 yards per attempt, 8 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and that's without even really factoring in what he's done in the running game for them, which I am pulling up right now. On Saturday against South Carolina, their first SEC game, 17 carries for 77 yards. I think pretty clearly he's the answer I would go with for the best quarterback left on Georgia's schedule.
I think the other thing is, I've been more impressed with Derek Dooley as an offensive coordinator than I thought I would be. Admittedly, I haven't watched Missouri a ton this year. I tried to watch some of the game against South Carolina on Saturday, but I haven't seen a ton of them this year. But Derek Dooley was someone that I thought would not be an offensive coordinator of consequence, especially after they lost Josh Heupel, which was obviously a very respected offensive mind. But Dooley, I think, has ended up being a pretty good SEC offensive coordinator. Let me get a few more YouTube comments, and after that we may try to get off the air here. Jacob Thompson says, look at Malzahn's quarterbacks. They don't do better as time goes on. Certainly you could say that about Jarrett Stidham. Maybe didn't improve the way that you thought he would have, given his status as a former 5-star, I think, coming out of when he was it Baylor he was at? So, yeah, Malzahn's had that trouble before. Maybe Nick's a little bit different kind of player. That's a fair point to bring up. Dan Riggin says, does anyone think Florida might be better than we thought? So, Dan, I mean, I'm going to just, be as honest as I can throughout, the weeks here. When you give as many opinions as I do, some are going to be right, some are going to be wrong. Some of the things that I kind of spouted off about at the beginning of the year have already been proven to be way wrong. I am still pretty confident in my belief, though, that Florida is not really all that much better than I thought. I think they've been helped by what they've played thus far. Tennessee is a disaster. Miami's not great. And then the Kentucky situation, I think Kentucky's got some real problems too. So, obviously we knew that Florida's going to be able to do some things defensively, and they are. Florida fans will tell you they're going to be way better with Kyle Trask than Felipe Franks. He has been better than Franks, but being better than Franks is not that high of a bar to clear. So there are plenty of instances where I would take some of my chips off the table if I could in terms of bold proclamations that I've made. I'd still make a pretty strong bet against Florida, and at the moment, I'm not going to apologize for that.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot about Florida in these 3-game stretch coming up after this week, after Cupcake and Townsend, their second FCS team of the year, might I add. They go home for Auburn, at LSU, at South Carolina, 3 straight weeks. And then they have their bye, and then Georgia. So, by the time that Georgia-Florida game rolls around, I think we'll have a lot better idea of what this Florida team actually is, because I think we both agree they're probably not going to be the favorites against Auburn and LSU. And, if they lose those games in the way they certainly could, Florida could be coming into that game unranked. And then, I don't know if I want to be playing a tough South Carolina team, a team that's going to want to be physical with you, after playing Auburn and LSU in back-to-back weeks.
So momentum has. I thought Mo may have seen my comment a little earlier. He said, "Can we change the Gator hater back to the updater?" Yeah. So Mo, that's going to get changed back today. I wrote a message to you in our YouTube comment section a little earlier, but yeah, we're going to change that back. Seth Auld says, "How much longer does Mullen have?" I don't think we're in that kind of situation.
No.
We do have a few SEC coaches who I do believe are on the hot seat. I think Will Muschamp's on the hot seat at South Carolina. I mean, I've read a lot of stuff coming from fans on this. It's pretty intense around there. Now, I don't know if that's risen to the level of being, kind of a booster thing yet, because that's where it really gets serious. But fans are not wanting to be patient with him right now. They see a lot of things they don't like. Pruitt's obviously a big issue. Y'all don't care about this as much. Chad Morris at Arkansas, I don't quite know what Morris even has to sell to hold on to his job. I would say that if you did a approval rating, I would say that Mullen's approval rating at Florida is higher than Jimbo Fisher's is at Texas A&M right now.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the sort of fan unrest with Muschamp. I would sort of, caution against that, because we saw fan pushback, certainly to prevent Greg Schiano from getting the job, and that's how Jeremy Pruitt sort of ended up there, and Philip Fulmer is there as the AD. I'm not saying, Schiano is going to lead Tennessee to championships, but I feel pretty comfortable saying Tennessee would be in a lot better of a spot right now than if they had Schiano.
Here's the one thing I'd be curious about. I don't know a ton about this. First of all, Muschamp's buyout's very, very expensive. Very expensive for whatever reason. I actually think it's a pretty fair question to ask of, this guy was a defensive coordinator at Auburn and not a good one. I mean, you can go back and look at the numbers. It was shockingly how bad his defense was at Auburn, and yet somehow he ended up with the same kind of buyout that a coach in demand would have gotten. It was actually kind of a strange contract when you go back and look at the one that he signed at South Carolina. But even apart from the expense of the buyout, South Carolina has recently spent a lot of money on facilities. And, Georgia, when it does this, for the most part, raises the money on the front end. And by the time you break ground, Georgia has gotten a substantial capital investment to, provide something like this. They're pretty careful with stuff like that. Georgia's also got a bigger donor base, I'm assuming, than South Carolina does. I'd be very curious to see how much money South Carolina owes. Maybe it's not very much. I honestly don't know. But I'd be very curious to see how much money they owe on some of these big facility enhancements they've been a part of, because if they are in the red on their commercial real estate, at the same time fans are saying, I'm not really wanting to support this product, at that point in time, they may be more moved towards action because, that bill comes due at the first of every month.
Right. And I would just add, if you're an upset South Carolina fan, who are you going to go out and get that you think is pretty clearly better than Muschamp? Because Muschamp, for all his perceived flaws and whatnot, he's a very good recruiter. He's able to get talent. Florida hasn't been able to get the same level of talent since he was there. South Carolina is getting better talent, and they're in on guys they really probably shouldn't have any business being in on. Zach Pickens a year ago, Jordan Birch this year to an extent. So, you got to give me a name that you're going to come up with that's certainly going to be better than that. And you're going to have to
BTW says Mel Tucker.
I don't think Mel Tucker's leaving Colorado after 1 year.
But, we know he interviewed for the Tennessee job. And we know that I'm guessing that he has an opportunity to interview for any SEC job that comes up in this offseason. Maybe they think he's not quite ready for that job yet because, he's obviously got some stuff to prove as a recruiter. But he's going to get interviews. He got a Tennessee interview already. He's going to get some interviews. I don't know how things have gone for them since they lost to Air Force the other day.
They beat Arizona State last week.
Oh, good. Well, good for them.
It's a ranked win.
Yeah. I'm still a little suspicious of Herm Edwards running that program, but that's a good win, though, for Colorado. So a good start for them overall, other than the one they lost to Air Force. So on the field, he's doing a pretty good job there, which I think is going to get the attention of some of these SEC ADs. I wonder how long they wait on this. By the way, the Green Soldiers, some others, I'm not sure how this topic came up. They want to trade an SEC East team for an SEC West team. I'd be fine with to make the league a little bit more geographic. I'd be fine with Auburn and Alabama coming over here. Play Alabama in the East every single year. I got no problem
And
with
who
that.
do you give up? Missouri and
Vanderbilt.
Yeah,
the two teams.
The two westernmost geographic teams.
The only teams in the SEC East in the Central Time Zone, right?
I believe that is.
Although if you bring over Alabama and Auburn, that won't be the case anymore. I'd be okay with that. Listen, it'd benefit me. I get to see good games.
Be careful what you ask for, though.
Yeah, probably. Anybody else got anything they want to do? Robert Barnes says Mel Tucker has a great job. Yeah, I don't know if Colorado's a great job. He's doing a good job. I'm not so sure that Colorado's a great job.
I do think there's potentially, maybe an easier trek upward, given that USC just seems to be in a constant state of unrest right now. You can sort of win that division. You can sort of make a name for yourself in that division. Mac McIntyre just won the Pac-12 South, I believe, 2 years ago. Whereas, South Carolina, you're always at best, just given because Georgia and Florida just have infinitely more resources, you're always going to be facing a really steep uphill climb, and you sort of need both those teams to be down at the same time.
Gregory Nowak says, funny fan perception when it comes to coaches. South Carolina not playing much differently than Florida. Florida's been lucky not to lose 2 games. Carolina hasn't played well, but killed themselves with a ton of back-breaking turnovers. That's actually probably a pretty good point, Gregory. If you really kind of drill down on some of this kind of stuff, the difference between winning and losing. And even the blowout, seemingly, by scoreboard margin, blowout Missouri, South Carolina even had their chances there. I guess I'm going to try to show a little humility here, which is, for me, not always the easiest thing to do. I have been adamant that if I was a South Carolina fan, I would wait out whatever's going to happen with Clemson, whatever's going to happen with Georgia, and kind of trust Will Muschamp, who, as I've said before, is winning recruiting battles that other South Carolina coaches might not win. I would kind of wait that out. There's a chance I'm just wrong, though. There's just a chance I'm wrong. And I know you're a fairly sizable underdog at Missouri, but, boy, it's tough to lose that game by 20 points. Let's see what happens against Tennessee. Let's see what happens against Kentucky. Let's see what happens even against Florida. I mean, obviously there's not much Muschamp can do against Georgia and Clemson right now, but that shouldn't preclude him from competing against some of these other teams. And so let's see what happens in some of those games as kind of a determination of kind of what they really do have with him. Because, I mean, South Carolina is not getting Urban Meyer or Bob Stoops. So what is like the next level of coach? What does it look like for them? And I would suggest that it probably, at least to me, if I'm, in charge of my own big state U, I think I'd probably take Muschamp over the person that they could probably hire. But at some point in time, Muschamp's got to do something. I mean, he's now been a head coach for a number of years, and seemingly it's always a lot of offensive issues that he's facing.
And I would just add, if you're allowed to believe that Bo Nix is going to get better over the course of the season, I think we can expect the same sort of thing from Ryan Hilinski.
Who I think is better than Bo Nix right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Hilinski has shown a little bit more in what he's able to do. It isn't as – I mean, he doesn't have a running game to really rely on at this point in time, but he's shown me a little bit more.
Seth All will finish with this. He says, CBS first-round draft picks came out. Fromm wasn't on it. Does he stay for his senior season if by the end of the year he isn't projected as a first-round pick? That means the same draft class as Trevor Lawrence if he were to come back. So you can find – I mean, there's a lot of mock drafts, and you can find like wildly different takes on Fromm. I've seen him literally number one overall, and I've also seen him not in the first round. I mean, the one thing I do know is that mock drafts are notoriously wrong this time of year. And like the one thing I think it's hard for all of us to wrap our mind around, the ultimate legacy of Jake Fromm as both a player and as a prospect, I think for the most part it's still yet to be written. I mean, we are in his third season as a Georgia starter. We're talking about adding another pretty large data set into the sample of opinion we already have on him. I mean, I think that we're going to see big games against good teams. And I think by the time December rolls around, this debate of is he a first-round pick or not, one way or another, that's not going to be going on. Now, there are surprising, prospects from time to time.
Daniel Jones.
Yeah, for instance, if you had asked me last, October, if Daniel Jones would be, first-round draft pick, I probably would have said no.
Who?
So
no, you said who.
Yeah, I would probably said who first, and then I would have said no. So there are surprising, picks from time to time. But one way or another, we're going to know by the end of the year what Jake Fromm is. Jake Fromm has at least crossed this threshold. He is one of the very, 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 very good quarterbacks that Georgia's ever had.
Mm-hmm.
The next pathway for him, 2 steps down the block, is the greatest signal caller in the history of this program. And that's certainly available to him. I'm talking about unquestioned, undeniable, undebatable. That's certainly there for him. That kind of Mount Rushmore of, Georgia figures that includes Herschel Walker and probably includes, David Pollock and, you can include whoever you want to include. There's also probably room for one more face on that, and that face may be Jake Fromm's by the time his career ends. But a lot of that's still yet to be determined. I'm kind of okay with that uncertainty. I'm kind of okay with that because there are a lot of people that seem to want to have their mind made up now that he's either definitely this or he's definitely not that. And this is one of those where, and I've been saying this now for a while, and on this point I've been pretty consistent, that this just needs to play itself out as a draft prospect, as a historic figure in college football. Let's just find out where we are in December on this. And one way or another, I don't think there's going to be a ton of debate, either for the good or for the bad.
If Fromm, and I've made my position pretty well stated on this, if Fromm continues to play like he did against Notre Dame, against Auburn, A&M, Alabama or LSU, whoever comes out of the West, we're not going to be having this debate. It's going to be pretty obvious that this guy has the chops to go up against elite athletes and elite defenses and sort of make them pay. He did it last year against Alabama. He's continually gotten better over the course of his college career. I think if you wanted to make the argument that what he did on Saturday was the most impressive game he's had in a Georgia uniform, I'd be willing to listen to that argument. He was just, from a field level, just everything that he was doing in that second half was really just an incredible watch and an incredible performance from him. And if we see more of that against elite teams, it's not really up for a debate.
Accuracy is more important than arm strength.
Yep.
There is a certain level of arm strength that's required. But beyond that level of arm strength, it doesn't make you a better quarterback necessarily to have a stronger arm. You have to have a strong enough arm. But within the category of strong enough arms, there's not necessarily extra points given for having a stronger arm than other guys who kind of cross that threshold. But there's always going to be a ROI on increased accuracy. The more you go up standard deviations on the accuracy scale, the better you get as a quarterback. Y'all go back and watch some of the throws that Fromm made on Saturday. He was putting those things into tight spots, and it was very impressive.
Chad Pennington had a much better NFL career than Jamarcus Russell.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a pretty good comparison of that. All right, let's go. Good stuff. Hank Watson also talking about some of those pre-snap reads that he does. Yeah, on that standpoint, certainly I'm left to take the word of the people who are talking about what he's doing, but it certainly seems to be pretty impressive what he is doing. And then there are moments like the Rose Bowl, for instance, where it's pretty obvious that he changed a play into something that really worked for Georgia, but certainly the people that know that part of it the best kind of rave about him on that. We really appreciate you being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down today here on DawgNation Daily. I also want to remind you before we get ready to get out of here, we mentioned the weather before. Obviously, that hot weather's kind of hanging around. How much longer does it plan to hang around for? The AJC's got some good reporting on this. Get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com. You can find out more about that. Also, there's some things happening to Georgia 400, which is a big deal for me because it's the road I drive on every single day. You better believe I'm going to be reading about that. And then a whole lot more on sports with the Braves getting ready to get going in the playoffs next week. Falcons, boy, there's some issues to be dealt with in Flowery Branch. You can get great coverage of all of that at ajc.com. Get your Atlanta news now and check in throughout the day at ajc.com for Atlanta news now. And R.S. Andrews, thanks for being a part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Hope you'll check it on Friday, our R.S. Andrews Go with the Flow, as we look at the top games of the weekend and give our thoughts on how they may unfold. Hope you'll check that out coming up on Friday on all the DawgNation video channels. For now, thanks for being a part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Georgia United Credit Union. Hope you have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.